And Prime Minister Mark Carney is calling on Israel to give up control of aid delivery to Gaza as reports grow of mass starvation in the territory. In a post on X, the Prime Minister said, quote, Canada condemns the Israeli government's failure to prevent the rapidly deteriorating humanitarian disaster in Gaza, and that Israel's control of aid distribution must be replaced by comprehensive provision of humanitarian assistance led by international organizations. Our contributor, David Clement, joins me now in studio to unpack the debate over the aid in Gaza. Now, David, that's a pretty strong statement from the Prime Minister. What do you make of that, and how do you think other people are going to take that comment?
Well, so this is one of those instances where multiple things can be true. But I think if we rewind the clock, over the last 18 months, there have been a string of accusations of starvation and famine. And more often than not, that was not actually the case. The amount of aid going in was more than enough to feed everybody in Gaza multiple times a day. This now is an instance where we are actually seeing the consequences or the fruition of famine-like conditions.
Mhm.
And we're seeing that throughout Gaza. So the conditions for food insecurity are very real, and that shouldn't be underplayed. But it really comes down to who is at fault. And so international organizations, predominantly the UN and other organizations previously, were responsible for distributing aid. Part of the problem in that scenario was that there were numerous accounts of Hamas basically hijacking the trucks or stealing it, using the aid for themselves, repurposing the aid into military weapons, or turning it around and selling it, basically creating like a secondary black market to gouge Gazans who are supposed to be getting this aid for free. So in light of that, Israel now controls the aid process, and the logistics there are complicated because just yesterday, the spokesperson for Netanyahu was highlighting that there are hundreds and hundreds of trucks on the Gaza side of the border waiting to get picked up. And so the question is, how is the system redesigned to facilitate it rather than just sitting there and rotting, to actually get to the people who need it, while at the same time, and this is the kind of moral conundrum that Israel is, how do you also ensure that the aid isn't being hijacked by Hamas, being used by Hamas, or being resold by Hamas? And this is the balancing act that we're in. Obviously, something isn't working because they're not getting the aid. It may be entering Gaza, but it's not getting to the people who need it. And so the condemnation from Carney really comes down to, I think, the contentious part isn't that the food insecurity is a terrible situation. It's whether or not Israel is to blame for it. And I think that is still very much up for debate because it depends on how you view the conflict. Is it Israel's obligation to ensure that the aid enters? I think most people would say yes. Is it their obligation to ensure that it gets to the people who need it? Some people would argue yes. But then how do you cross the threshold of ensuring that it's not stolen by Hamas and resold or repurposed? And that is really where I think the gray area is, and what may have shocked some in the diplomatic world in terms of how starkly the prime minister was putting the blame on Israel.
Now, you mentioned Hamas basically taking advantage of the aid and
Mhm.
either redistributing it, selling it, whatever. Is that the main reason why international aid organizations are no longer distributing and why Israel has kind of taken the reins and is
Well,
controlling that?
yeah, the Israeli response to this would be, well, why does Hamas want the UN to distribute aid? Because they had infiltrated that process and been able to capitalize on it and utilize it for themselves.
Hmm.
And so remember, when Hamas says that they want something, now, does Hamas want the UN to administer aid because they will be better at it and Gazans will get food? My view on that is likely not. They have shown time and time again they don't really care about the civilians in Gaza. That's not something that they worry about. It's not their priority. Yes, they are technically the government, but they're a terror organization whose priorities are not that of any other formal government. And so I think that is a legitimate point from the Israelis in saying that if Hamas wants the UN to distribute aid, it's not because they want aid to get to Gazans. It's because they know that they can circumvent that process to benefit themselves. And then that leaves us in the situation we're in now, where it's incredibly complicated. And you also have to factor in, right? This war has gone on since October 2023. How has Hamas rearmed itself? Right? Where have they not completely run out of ammunition, missiles, bullets? We know from various reports that they manufacture some of this themselves, but where do they get the materials? There are examples of them taking aid that was supposed to be used to rebuild, let's say, water infrastructure in the pipes, turning that into rockets. So if Hamas wants the UN to distribute aid, there is a credible argument to be made that they want the UN to distribute aid because they know that they can capitalize from it. And that's really part of the problem we're in.
But David, on that, you've mentioned how long this war has gone on for.
Mhm.
How is it that the UN or other world leaders haven't figured out how an aid distribution system should be working to be giving people food but not be stolen?
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to risk, right? If you're going to go into, if you're going to be in an aid organization distributing aid in Gaza, you need security guarantees that you're not going to be shot at. You could get security guarantees from the Israelis and the IDF. You're not going to get it from Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
And when their fighters roll in and then hijack a truck, that makes the aid distribution process incredibly difficult. And so it's not like we're dealing with a scenario where you have two legitimate governments at war with each other who generally have an expectation of humanitarian expectation or wanting to protect their civilians. Israel certainly would make the argument that they're doing all of this because they want to protect their civilians. I don't think that that's true for Hamas.
I want to go to another comment that
Mhm.
the prime minister made. He had said that he's pushing again to support a two-state solution.
Mhm.
What would a two-state solution look like, and is that possible at this point?
Yeah, so in order to actually be recognized as a state, you need a population, territory, government, and international relations.
Mhm.
A two-state solution is prior to October 7th, I think something that most people, including most Israelis, would have in theory supported. But the problem with a two-state solution now, so first on the logistics. So you have a population in Gaza and you have a population in the West Bank. They're not connected. So what is the territory of this Palestinian state? Nobody really knows. What would be the capital city of it? Nobody really knows. Who is the government? Is it Hamas? Is it the Palestinian Authority? Who is governing this new state? And can whoever governs it engage in international relations? The second, more moral aspect of a two-state solution is unless you can answer who the government is, if the government is Hamas, there is an argument to be made that you're handing the keys of statehood to Hamas because they just so happened to murder enough Israeli civilians to get the world at the table and have picked a war or started a war that they can't win. That creates a very warped precedent internationally where if any other terror organization over disputed territory could view that as basically the green light where if we just commit enough atrocities and create a disastrous humanitarian scenario, well, then maybe the world will listen to us. And that, for me, I think creates a really uncomfortable precedent because that's not the signal you want to be sending to other terror organizations around the world. And so a two-state solution is something, right? Palestinians deserve sovereignty, dignity, like all of the things that we enjoy. Of course they do. But the question is who governs it, how do they behave, and how do they behave specifically in regards to their neighbor Israel?
Well, David, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you.